Do we think this is a lightning bolt standard, or do we think this is a shock standard?
Distraction makers.
I feel like I haven't been this optimistic about Magic in quite a while, right?
Great Commander news.
Right? Yeah,
All
right.
And now Foundations.
Foundations. I am extremely excited about Foundations, and I'm also very excited to talk about it.
Yes.
So what this video is going to be is an overview of what we know about Foundations so far. We're going to talk about some specific cards in Foundations and kind of their implications of those cards for Magic into the future. And then we're going to bring out our little crystal ball, and we're going to talk about what we think might happen because of Foundations.
Yes. Before we start talking about our predictions for Foundations, please, if you like our videos, you can give us a little like and subscribe and maybe a comment down below. Also, you can join our Discord. You can find a link for that in the description down below. And today's video is brought to you by
My Game. Bullets and Teeth and Aliens is a cooperative card game for 2 to 5 players about blasting space bugs and getting paid. If that sounds cool to you, there's a link in the description below so you can check out the Kickstarter page and get notified when it goes live.
Back to the video. All right, so Foundations, in total, it's 140 new cards and 140 reprints, but there's going to be the big box set?
So yeah, there's like 140 roughly reprints, 140 roughly new cards. I think it's about 50-50 new and old, but then we're also going to get like some special guests things. Like there's also some extra stuff.
Right, because it seems like a set that it's marketed as being a set for beginners, right? It's like not a core set.
The place to start.
It's the place to start for everyone. But to make sure that
it's kind of like a core set.
Kind of like a core set, but to make sure everyone's interested. Because not everyone was always interested in a new core set because maybe it wasn't that many new cards that came out or something. They want to make sure there's cards for everybody. So yeah, lots of new cards and like you said, special guests and stuff to get Modern and Commander players invested.
It's supposed to be sort of a new entry point for players. It's a draftable format, so this basically should feel very similar to any kind of other Magic release. Also, the really big thing that Foundations is starting as a precedent is that it will be standard legal until at least 2029.
What?
So this is unprecedented in terms of Magic, but there are other card games that we have seen things like this happen in.
Yeah.
Specifically, Hearthstone has a core set that is sort of a collection of cards that get changed every once in a while and patched because it's a digital game, but they are always legal in the standard format of Hearthstone. Which has worked out, I think, pretty well for them. So I think some of the goals out of the gate here, this I feel like is supposed to be kind of a new kickoff for Standard to kind of like revitalize the format. It's been struggling quite a bit in recent years in terms of just nobody playing it.
I've kind of been saying that my prediction is that like Standard doesn't necessarily need to be something different. I think it just honestly needs a rebranding in a way, whatever that might be. But I think players can get on board for a rotating format given the right circumstances.
Right, and I think a big one is going to be accessibility of game pieces, and this helps to solve a lot of those problems. Theoretically, if you're like sort of collected your Foundation set, the cards in it that are tournament viable or whatever, then you're good to go. Some interesting parts of Foundations that we sort of keyed in on is that it will have a jumpstart component, which is a really interesting format where you get 2 packs, you shuffle them together, and then you just play.
Yeah.
Really easy to jump into. I like this format a lot. I like this idea a lot. I think this could kind of maybe be its own game even. It'd be fascinating. It's probably a little too random for like tournaments in the way that Wizards has done it, but I think a game could be built.
Does it.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. The other thing of note is that you can buy a starter collection, which we think might be kind of like a cube. That's getting into predictions. But
but
it's
350 plus cards.
Yeah,
right? Cubes are
lands.
Cubes are 360.
Right.
And I don't know if that includes or doesn't include lands.
I would
Probably
assume
check.
not.
Right. I'm not positive about that. But
right. So if this is playable as like a cube out of the box, it kind of puts Magic into kind of a living card game. Like,
at least the core set here. Yeah.
In terms of like, well, maybe you can just buy the starter collection and that's Magic for you entirely, which is pretty wild.
Does the starter collection come with like unboosted cards?
Yeah, I think you get 350
You just get the
cards.
350. That's wild.
I think. I mean, 100%. I think there's boosters in it. But I'm pretty sure it's a set 100 or 300.
Because I'd have to assume if none of it's in boosters, then that feels very much like Cube. If it's all in boosters, it could still technically be Cube or it's just like some way of drafting.
Right. Well, like, what's the difference between this and a booster box then? Right. So this has to be like
it
some
has to
known
be some known.
cards,
but if that's
plus
the
lands,
case,
but
then like technically that's more cards than the set itself. So
yeah, you get multiples.
That's fucking cube. There's no way it's not cube.
Yeah, it's probably cube. There's also going to be special guest cards, which that's stuff that they've done in previous sets, where chase cards from previous sets for Commander or things like that are going to be printed with new art and stuff like that. I assume new art. I don't know. Okay, so let's start getting into some of the cards that we know about so far and sort of the implications for these choices. One thing of note is that there's a slight change in templating, which I am a little on the fence about.
You hate it.
I mean, it's like fine, but like it seems weird. Okay, so let me just say what it is. So the change in templating is, instead of like, it used to be, they would say something like when Thragtusk enters the battlefield.
Yeah.
And then it went when Thragtusk enters. And now it's when this creature enters. And I'm sort of left wondering, why are you not just coming up with a keyword?
Yeah, that just say when Thragtusk enters
the
battlefield.
The problem is
long words.
Right, like if the creature name was longer than this creature, then this makes a certain amount of sense.
Right, but it's like now it can technically be longer than if they were to just say the creature name. Yeah, I think generally I'm on board for them just keywording it at this point.
Like give us a battle cry.
I kind
of
wonder, right? It's not like they haven't done it before, right? It technically probably wouldn't be like a mechanic keyword, right? As much as ability word, right? Like that's the term for it. So you still know generally, war cry, whatever. And when it enters the battlefield, something happens, right?
So let's talk about some of the specific cards that they have spoiled so far and kind of some design implications for these.
Yeah.
Some of the big ones are Llanowar Elves, Day of Judgment, Hero's Downfall, and a card called Vengeful Blood Witch. So let's go through these. Llanowar Elves in particular. This is sort of the quintessential mana dork. It's 1 mana, 1/1 that you can tap to make a green.
Yep.
And it has been standard legal before, and the formats in which it has been legal in have been particularly sort of high power for standard. So the other cards that are also that I mentioned also play into this, like the sort of staples that they're choosing from past standards are at a higher power level. But this is sort of setting a new baseline.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, I guess worry that they're sort of setting a higher than average power level for a set in the standard format that doesn't rotate.
Do it.
I think it's fine.
Do it.
Ultimately.
It's time.
I mean, you got to be careful though, right? So previously what would happen is you would rotate sort of between what I think would be referred to as a shock format or a lightning bolt format, where you'd get sort of a segment of standard where shock is the most powerful like burn spell, and then you get other formats where lightning bolt is the most powerful burn spell. And those formats feel distinctly different from each other. The games are faster, the decks are more aggressive. Red deck wins in particular is more powerful and that's sort of been a problem already in Best of One standard. But like Best of One is just a broken format anyway, so whatever. So the other one that I really wanted to touch on is Vengeful Blood Witch.
Yeah.
So Vengeful Blood Witch is a sort of, I think, a near functional reprint of the card Blood Artist. So this is an aristocrats themed card, of which we have seen many like it. I think what's interesting is the implication of this is basically saying that like an aristocrat strategy is more than likely going to be sort of a standard staple moving forward. And so that also has some kind of interesting implications in that, okay, well, is it going to be playable sometimes and not other times? Is it like always just going to be hanging around? And what does this mean for like the predictability of a standard format? Because one of standard's strengths was always that it was always changing. The soil was being turned over. The types of strategies that were being played would change. And maybe this is a new era for standard, I guess. All right, so now we're going to get crazy. Prediction time.
Oh, okay.
What do we think is going to happen? What do we think is going to come from this? We've got these creatures, we know.
Yeah.
We already kind of understand the implications, but what do we think is going to be, like, maybe what are some other cards we think are going to show up? What are, what do we think this does for the future band?
I think the ocean levels are going to start rising.
That's a problem.
And it's going to be a real problem. And Magic is the reason.
It's too many cards.
At least people are talking about the set as if that's what's happening. And I don't really understand. Like, I get the concerns, right? But look, it's not like the new direction of fire design and creating creatures that are like incredibly powerful has not already sort of been power creeping a lot of the sets. And I don't even necessarily disagree with that tactic. I do think, though, that having some sort of a core set to unify around, I think is just probably going to be helping the designers a significant amount. And I think that right now they probably need help, because it's not that they're bad designers, but you don't have a lot of time. You have a lot more cards to design, and you have to keep track of what cards are going into this format that is now taking 3 years to rotate. And it's like, if you end up having this sort of more solidified baseline that you can then go and pick and pull from, then even if Aristocrats is going to be potentially a viable option, they at least know, like, this is the Aristocrats cards that are always going to be available.
Right.
And like, I think that it's going to be easier for them to be able to use that as a baseline and know these cards are going to be available. Therefore, when we start implementing cards, we can sort of assume if there is to be a deck that is constructed using these, that these cards are going to be staples of that. Which, like, might seem like it's ruining some creativity in deck construction, but, like, let's be honest, that's already kind of happening in Standard anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal probably is to make this about a third or ish of the format. Is that if you like own all the foundation cards, you have like maybe a quarter to a third of your decks kind of figured out, or like you'll have the cards you need already.
Right.
You know, I do worry a little bit about it making the format have less unique play patterns. Standard even now it has a bit of this problem where we kind of see like repeated archetypes just keep showing up and up. You know, Rakdos aggro or mid-range or whatever it is, and then blue-white control, and like these sort of archetypes just keep showing up again and again. And that didn't used to be the case for Standard. It used to be that you would get a more considerable amount of diversity in the format, and you would get sort of unique play patterns as they were taking risks on interesting new ideas.
So this is what I'm hopeful for. I don't know if this is what's happening, right?
Yeah.
My concern right now is that if they don't have enough design time to cook up some of these more unique design possibilities, or maybe it's limitations because they're trying to move away from parasitic designs. Maybe they're trying to design for Commander. I don't know what it is. But if it's a time thing and they have to fall back on these sort of general design principles of different archetypes and colors and stuff like that, what I'm hoping for is that if this saves them some opportunities or gives them more of a standard sort of goalpost to have these archetypes off of, then maybe we might be able to see some more little bits of interesting, maybe possibly parasitic, but I don't mind that.
You're basically saying they can have this to fall back on if they're taking risks that don't work.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
I'm hoping that this will introduce more creative cards into Standard, and we're kind of already seeing like a couple really weird ones that are different from Magic's like usual type of a thing in Duskborn. It's like not crazy, but there's like a couple things that definitely seem like weird, silly attempts at something a little bit different. And so I'm like curious to know if that's going to be the direction that happens. I'm hoping it ends up creating more creative deck archetypes in Standard.
Yeah. I could see that. I do wonder about, we sort of mentioned before about how this might be Magic tipping its toe into like the living card game market.
Yeah.
There's quite a few living card games that are successful. Lord of the Rings, Arkham Horror.
There's Game of Thrones. There's a Netrunner.
So, I have a pretty wild prediction.
Okay.
I think that Wizards will create a new format starting with Foundations.
Right.
I don't know if it'll happen now or if it will happen into the future, but I don't think it's going to be like Modern, right? Where it's like Foundations forward. I think that's a possibility. But I also think this might start a new rotating format that brings us back to a smaller window of time. If Standard has moved to 3 years, I could see a Foundations format being a 1 year rotation.
It's everything, all the sets for the year in tandem with Foundations.
Yeah, and that way you have this constant, but you can rotate it more often. You're going to have a hard time getting players involved in any kind of rotating format, but I do wonder about like if a large enough percentage of the card base, right? We're talking like, okay, well, if this can be a third of decks, and if that were like, I don't know how you do that at a 3 year period, but I think at a 1 year period, I think you might be able to get the cards that are in Foundations end up occupying a third of most tournament decks.
Right.
And I think in that case, all right, well, now the cost of a deck in that format has been brought down.
And imagine, yes, and also if you're designing archetypes, right? I think going back a little bit to like how this could help alleviate design problems or shortcuts to better or more interesting creative design opportunities is like if you look at a Vengeful Blood Witch, imagine one set you're like, well, I want to try and have Vengeful Blood Witch work this way with these cards.
Right.
And then the next year you're like, how else can we work with Vengeful Blood Witch? What's these other knobs that we can sort of turn to get a different use case out of it?
Right. So you're like, okay, well, this is the current flavor of Aristocrats. How do we get a different flavor of Aristocrats?
Maybe there's some other
I don't know.
untapped
Like
thing.
Aristocrats is such a specific play pattern. That's why I'm kind of like, it's a little weird to kind of like lean in that direction.
Yeah.
It kind of feels a bit like this is Magic's greatest hits, and we're like going to collect them into one sort of spot, and then like have those greatest hits always be around.
Yeah.
Because over the last 30 years, we've figured out these interesting play patterns. So let's collect them and then move forward onto newer play patterns potentially.
Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. I do see a possibility that this ends up creating just a new format, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I said it earlier that like, I think that Standard just honestly has like a marketing problem. Like obviously the marketing problem is that Commander's marketing is much greater at the moment, but I think that a little bit of a rebranding, you bring some excitement, you bring some celebration, you bring this big, now's the best time to play Magic the Gathering, Foundations.
Well,
like
to
I think
be
that's
honest,
what players need.
Like I love Standard. Like Standard has been my format of choice for 20 years. I don't feel like playing Standard right now. And part of the reason why is because I don't have any cards for Standard anymore. Right. So like if there was a new entry point for a format, I would probably hop into it and be like, okay, well, like Foundations. All right, get Foundations. Now I'm ready to go. I'm ready to start off the new, 1 year rotating format or whatever.
Right. Especially, I mean, it makes it much easier, like you said, with the whole living card game thing of knowing like, okay, I got my whole Foundations collection. So I'm set. I don't need to get any more. I know that whatever, Lana War Elves is going to be my Lana War Elves for this thing, right? I also think it helps because, a lot of people have Lana War Elves. A lot of people have, well, I don't know how many people have Savannah Lions. I have a lot of Savannah Lions. But, like, a lot of people have these cards already, and so being able to sort of reintroduce them into the format means that you're having players that either have played for a long time, maybe they played in other formats, maybe they played in Commander, that might have these cards already in their collections. So they don't have to actually even go and get Foundations. They just know like, oh, these cards that I've been playing with in Commander, in Modern, in wherever, they're going to be legal and Standard till 2029 or whatever.
I think there's also a really good opportunity here for unique looking cards. Like if you're going to have Lana War Elves or whatever be legal until 2029 at least, you can create really special, cool versions of it. And that's an interesting way. And something I've kind of thought about is like, okay, well, if you don't have a game, or if you have a game that has really accessible game pieces, which I think is ideal, how do you then like get collectors excited, right? If the sort of baseline game pieces are really cheap, how do you then, create some kind of a secondary market to help support game stores and things? And I do think that like a more collectible, like special art, serialized, I think is fine. I think these things are fine as long as there's an alternative so you can just get the inexpensive game pieces to play the damn game. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
And I think this is something that we predicted actually months ago, before we even knew about Foundations.
Before we knew about Foundations.
We had talked about like, okay, how do you get players back into Standard? How do you bring that attention to it? And we said, well, they should probably come out with a new set. It should probably be a core set that sticks around for a long time. And it should probably come as a package that you can play as in any different format. So you can play it as a Commander game, you can play it as Cube, you can play it as a draftable thing, and it sticks around. And then you get players excited so that if the Wizards is worried about printing this thing that, maybe people stop buying it at a certain point or whatever, which happens a lot with starter sets, then you reprint it with new art. And once you get the new art, then people are like, well, I want this collector's edition of Foundations. And like 3 months later, we found out Foundations is coming out. We're like, wow, okay, maybe this is it.
All right, so to kind of wrap up some of our thoughts here, do we think this is a lightning bolt standard, or do we think this is a shock standard?
You make a good point that right now, Magic Arena, you can play best of one as opposed to best of three.
I mean, people it's more convenient, but it's not good for the game.
Right. It benefits red aggro. And right now, red aggro is already in a pretty strong place.
Yep.
I don't know. I personally feel like if everything else is getting bumped up a bit, I would not be surprised if Lightning Bolt gets printed. I feel like...
All right, he's on the record.
It's very... Look, it's very suspicious they have not released a red card yet. I'll just say that.
Right.
There's not one red card
that is pretty
that's been shown yet.
Okay, here's what we'll do. You'll say Lightning Bolt, I'll say Shock. But I'll say Counterspell. And you could go Mana Leak if you don't think it'll be Counterspell. Mana Leak's counter unless they pay 3.
Oh,
one blue, one
it's
colorless.
not sexy enough.
Mana Leak's very good. Counterspell's probably too good. I'm probably wrong. I think it's Mana Leak, but
look, if it were me, I'd say yes to Counterspell.
Okay, you can be Lightning Bolt and Counterspell then, and I'll be Mana Leak and Shock.
I'm not positive, but if I'm thinking, okay, what's raising that power level, right, across the board?
Mana Leak's probably doing that.
It's 1 in a blue?
It's 1 in a blue, counter
and they
unless
have to
they pay 3
more?
Yeah.
That's good. I feel like there's cards
really
in Standard
good.
that are like similar, but yeah, not that good.
Right.
I just feel like it's like quintessential cards though. You know?
Well, if I'm thinking back on the history of Standard, like Counterspell hasn't been in Standard since like way back in the day.
Yeah.
Mana Leak has been in Standard. I think it's even in like 8th edition or something. Like
so it's probably pretty likely that at the very least it'll be Mana Leak.
I think it's Mana Leak,
Yeah.
but I you know what, let's get crazy and say it's like Counterspell.
I'm concerned that they're not going to do Counterspell. Mostly because if this is players' baby's first Magic, right? And you throw them in the deep end with the quintessential Counterspell spell, right? Maybe players might not like that.
Yeah.
And if this is Foundations, what I think is interesting is that it allows them to technically print stronger cards now in the Standard sets because those will rotate out. So Foundations...
I guess these technically aren't rotating. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
So if Foundations technically is like... Maybe Foundations is Shock, but then the next set, they're like, well, we can print a Lightning Bolt.
All right. That's kind of why I'm more on the Shock Mana Leak side of things, I think. But, let's get crazy. I don't know.
I say get crazy.
Do it.
I say come out with Commander Lightning Bolt that deals 6 damage to 3 other target players, to all other players.
Each opponent
takes 6 damage for 1 red.
Okay,
That's it.
That doesn't work. And
that works.
I do think we need a Commander Lightning Bolt that's deal 3 damage to each opponent.
Fuck it, do it.
Not 6 damage to each.
It's 6 damage to each opponent.
If
it's not standard.
No. This is it. It's 1 red, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. If you have 3 or more opponents, deal 6 damage to them instead.
That could work. It could be
best of both worlds.
Deal 3 damage to each opponent for each opponent in the game. Then it's 9
Do you count yourself? Is it? You're an opponent, technically. You're not your opponent, but
yeah.
Each player.
It has to get stronger with less players, not weaker. Right?
No. Because then it's just in 2-player. You're just.
I know. I'm thinking like as the game of Commander progresses, it probably has to get stronger, but it can't.
No, it can't because it doesn't work in 2-player then.
Right. Yeah. Damn.
No, that's good though. Deal 3 damage per opponent to target opponent.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Sure.
Put it in there.
If not, I'll proxy it.
Distraction makers approved.